Paul McIsaac, 84 or 85, um, Chicago or Boston. I was born in Chicago. My father was actually an undocumented, even back in the 20s, coming from Scotland because there was this severe uh, closure of immigration during that period, early uh, period of anti-immigration, and he snuck across the border. He never actually got his citizenship. My mother was from the South, from rural Georgia, and I spent time both in Chicago and in rural apartheid Georgia on a farm with an outhouse and no electricity, both. Um, Managed to get out of high school and immediately got involved in theater and film. Never went to college. Went into the Army. It was during the era of the draft, and but not. It was before Vietnam. I was fortunate enough to be in what we called the peacetime army because it was between Korea and Vietnam, and ended up actually doing theater work officially in the army. And there's many more stories to all of that, including the beginning of my political education, because I was a very typical American with no political education at all. And my reaction to the authoritarianism of the army was the basis of it. And I met someone who recently died, actually, Michael Alaimo, who was a conscientious objector, and it was from him I began to learn about a progressive view of the world. Came back to New York and got more and more involved. Got more and more involved in by way of theater in progressive street theater, left wing theater, the Living Theater. Began to do work with. And again, that would be another step toward becoming politically aware. And in the case of Living Theater, very much an anarchist view of the world. They were formally anarchists, thought of themselves as anarchists especially in the nonviolent tradition. And as the 60s, making it very, very short, in the 1960s, I got involved in simultaneously. I mean, I was in Paris in 68, and it was the first time I had actually encountered people who had a formal self-definition as anarchists, as only Europeans can do and Americans seldom can do. They had a history. They understood their history. They were able to relate directly to things like the commune and so forth. Anecdote: I remember being with a young woman, and as we were digging up the cobblestones in Saint Michel, she said, "My grandfather dug up these same stones." I mean, that's the difference between America and France. She actually related to the idea of revolt, rebellion, resistance with her hands in the dirt in the streets, which I had never experienced anything like that in America. Not to say we don't have an anarchist tradition, but it's not one that it's popularly known. It was in Chicago in '68, and that's when I met people from Newsreel and became active in Newsreel, which was the movement media collective that made many of the important films of that era about Panthers, some of the first women's films, some of the certainly films about anti-war resistance, and there was a strain of anarchists in that work. During that period, I heard about. I saw this pamphlet called "Listen, Marxists," and got very much simultaneously to learning about Murray Bookchin and meeting and getting to know him, a lifelong mentor and friend. At the same time, I was learning about that smaller part of the movement, which was dominated by anti-war people without necessarily more complicated politics than being opposed to the draft and the war, and also Marxist-Leninists and Trotsky, et cetera, et cetera. I was involved with the Yippies, which is the much similar to the situationalists and others that I had met in France, and this would be anarchism that was not always a theoretical or even very well politically developed, but much more of a kind of cultural, what we then in that period called the cultural revolutionaries, and with admiration and disdain from the left simultaneously. But it was active with them, and to this very day, I am still. I carry that theatrical notion of the politics of the theater of the streets, the politics of mobilizing people using theatrical, comedic techniques and approaches. I still do that a lot, even now in my 80s. Currently, to really quickly bring it up to date, currently I'm on the east end of Long Island, and aside from working in my garden, which is spends a lot of my time doing that, we have, of course, before, but most specifically since Trump's second election, we do have a small movement here. And there are people in various communities on Long Island who are relate to indivisible as the sort of basic relationship, and they are culturally quite different. These groups, some of them are much older people, and they're we have we'll stand by the street with a sign, and others are much more aggressive and have a culture much more from the left. I relate to all of the groups, and the way I do that is I dress up as Uncle Sam, and I carry posters. Let's see, I may have something here. Here's my Uncle Sam hat. I have Uncle Sam beard, complete Uncle Sam outfit, and then I will carry kind of sandwich boards, depending on the event. No kings, no billionaires. No kings since 1776. Defend our democracy. Defend our Constitution. My notion about, and I can't say that Uncle Sam is a quote unquote an anarchist figure, but what he is, which is part of the anarchist tradition, he is a sort of icon that gets used by and has been used by everything from the war propaganda office. I want you to go and fight, which would be many anarchists, pacifist anarchists would be abhorred by that. And there are certainly elements of him that was used attacking the Capitol, but my understanding about icons and about imagery is that they are to be taken and to be infused and to be transformed. And so to give you specific experience of why I think this works is that I have appeared in street parade, what's the right word? Street parties, where they close down the streets in towns out here, which um, means that the folks are going to be much more working class and they're going to be much more brown and black than you would see in the quote Hamptons. And they're going to include a large number of overt or covert Trump supporters. And so when Uncle Sam appears, their first reaction, including the Trump supporters, is, "Hey, Uncle Sam, give me 5." And then when they look at the poster when I'm saying defend our Constitution, they get caught in a little bit of a contradiction because they sort of, yeah, that would be something Uncle Sam would say, and yeah, defend the Constitution. But wait a minute, this guy is attacking the. So it puts them in a quandary, which is great. And then we talk, and we talk sometimes in a way I've never been able to talk to Trump people, and I would say my level of conversation with them is not what you would call anarchist. It's much more Bernie Sanders, because that's what actually is going to work. Well, there you go. There's gone all the way from being born to what I did last week. The first people that I encountered before I sat down and read things and began to struggle through and understand the differences, which I've spent a lifetime doing. I think because probably of my theater experience, that you have a tradition in the theater which is historically closer to what we think of as of anarchism, and a tradition that's very traditional in the sense of its relationship to the ruling culture or the bourgeois culture. And so I was attracted to the Commedia dell'arte, which is very anarchic in its relationship of between people and classes and gender roles, and not just the overt subject matter and characters that Commedia deals with, but the improvisational nature of it, the structure of Commedia, how it goes, how it disdains theaters, which is essentially for the most part historically a bourgeois location, and how it began in fact in the marketplace, and the theater that emerged influenced by that, which is certain aspects of Molière and the French tradition. In fact, not Shakespeare particularly. There are elements of that, of course, but that's not that tradition. That's a formal theater tradition. And so the people that I was attracted to as a young man, like the living theater and the various theater movements that were similar to them, and in fact later filmmaking. So I came to understand what I know to be anarchy through the culture, and then eventually began to know it as that. And then I have to say, Bookchin was certainly the most influential person who drew me to his work about the Spanish anarchists and then his work as a social ecologist, that then I began to look at and read and understand the different traditions of anarchy and the distinction between it and authoritarian left and various forms of hierarchical left, if you like. The reactionary elements of our society, uh, capitalism, the church, they have been very successful in defending their domain and educating and miseducating people about these questions of hierarchy, of the state. Anyone who wants to produce works of art or political work or engages with other people, you're up against a wall of very successful couple hundred years, probably one you could argue thousands of years, but most obviously hundreds of years of very successful propaganda work on the part of the right, of the reactionary, of the hierarchy. I mean, that's just so that when you approach someone who has really no political position or has a right, left, or liberal political position, the first thing you're confronting is the success that the right has had in its anti-communism and to say the least about anarchy is just reduced to what more accurately would be called chaos. I mean, that's what they think anarchy is chaos. Anarchy meaning in the popular mind, no structure, even they associate it with the most brutal kind of individualism. People just do, actually a kind of libertarianism. And so that's the first thing you're up against in culture and in talking, just day-to-day talking to someone, including with liberals. And now they wouldn't maybe have as many cliched ideas about it, but they still have their own set of ideas that are, and so to find a fresh and clear approach, statement, an image that is anti-authoritarian, that is non-hierarchical, that is, if you like, that is extremely hard. And not only are you up against all the cliches, but if you get down, it seems to me, if you get down to a kind of pure statement where you actually are successfully avoiding some of the propaganda, the barriers of the mindset. If you get down to the purest level of what that notion is about, then you're a utopian. Then you're maybe not afraid anymore that you're being, you just want to get rid of everything. You want to get rid of all the structure, defund the police, or whatever it is that they might think. If you get them down to the simplest level of discussion, well, then you're an unrealistic romantic. Then you think that people will kumbaya. People will just all live together and be happy, and they'll be. You just think there doesn't need to be any government. There doesn't need to be any controls. I don't need to control myself. We don't need to control ourselves. It gets right down to a psychological level that people are not capable of being truly free. People have to be restrained. They have to restrain themselves. They have to restrain others. So unfortunately, if you talk about the deepest desire and the deepest quest of what I take to be that anarchist tradition, then what you run up against is people's fear of freedom, their actual fear of what it would mean to have a society, to have a community that was not restrained by religion, by the state, by some form of patriarchal control. That's the deepest fear, that we're not capable of living in that way, and that if you suggest it, on one hand, you're as I say, you're frightening, because you're a bomb throwing, tear it all down. You look like those guys who attacked the Capitol. On the other hand, there's something deeply frightening that is being suggested, which is some kind of sexual, moral, spiritual, revolutionary viewpoint about humanity that's frightening. That I can't trust myself. Not only do I think society needs to be controlled and restricted and restrained, I need to be controlled, restricted, and restrained. So, to your question, what does it mean to take these ideas? In the case of liberals, it's interesting, because I think there's, if you have the right approach and you're open, there's a kind of recognition of there's sort of at some deep emotional place, every liberal wants to be an anarchist. Well, it would be great if we could do that. If we, if it would be great to be like all lovey-dovey. I'm satirizing it, but it would be great not to have all these structures and all that. And either I don't think people are capable of it, they would say, or other people aren't capable of it, or then at the deepest level, I'm not capable of it. I need restraint, structures. I need to be in a some sort of hierarchical system. About the same time, I mean, Murray had real problems with the yippies and the similar anarchist movements of that period of the 60s, 70s, etc. And we had many, many discussions about it. And the one place I did agree with him is that I do think that there has been a tendency, and I can't speak for all other places, but in America and the left as I know it, there has been a tendency for anarchy to be reduced to a fairly simplistic gesture, a kind of cultural gesture, symbolized by the big A with the slash. I mean, and that's it. That's kind of it. It just and that it's cultural only, and that if you actually, in many cases, if you actually talk with people, which I do at various anarchist conferences that have happened through the years, the anarchist book fair, wherever, I do find sometimes that there are people who are attracted to the cultural, what we see as the cultural implications of anarchy, and don't have necessarily any particular political concern beyond just that kind of gesture. So one thing about anarchy today is, for those that for those who just reduce it to a series of behaviors and gatherings and structure, that's really a kind of cultural gesture in that has its problems. For one thing, it's been usurped a lot by the fashion industry. Our engagement with hierarchy, with patriarchy, hierarchy, are really hard to even separate that. That's a very healthy thing. That I think that a necessary thing, and I think that a lot of people are doing work, writing and theoretical work, and some organizing work, such as municipalism and different efforts like that. I don't find that people feel the need to use the word anarchy. That I think what it is, and I take that to be it's anti-statist, anti-authoritarian commitment, and you can then talk about variations on it, whether it's anarcho-socialism or wherever you want to go with it. I don't see that the word adds much in this moment. On one hand, because of this, as I talked about earlier, the success of the right in slandering and making that slander really effective, and I'm not sure that the effort to address that is worth it in a certain sense. It's almost an impossibility that how successful they've been at demonizing or the word. And on the other hand, it needs to be qualified so much that I'm not sure how useful it is as a category today. I think that that to the extent that we carry the anti-authoritarian, anti-hierarchical critique of patriotism, capitalism, to the extent that we can use the work of theorists and cultural people that are in fact coming out of an anarchist tradition is very important. I'm not sure the word's that useful. When people, leftists, and I'm libertarian leftists, if you like, excluding sort of the Stalinists who faced fascism in Italy, Germany, Argentina, wherever. The truth is that when the society degrades to the point where the dominant political cultural reality is fascist or some variation of fascist, then we're pretty much obliged in resisting and defeating fascism to make alliances and work with people under fairly simple objectives. First of all, to confront the fascists and their power and how they're operating, and to confront them. And it doesn't matter who, in a sense, who I'm standing next to, if I'm just dealing with overt fascist power. Now every country has their own variation on what fascism looks like and operates in these different ways. So that it seems to me in the contemporary, so like my Uncle Sam, no traditional anarchist would say, well, that's a symbol of the state. Yes, that's true. That's true. Can I change that? do the people who encounter this Uncle Sam experience something different than the authoritarian Uncle Sam, who wants you to go out and die in a war, or who supports somebody like Trump, which is inconceivable to me, even given the history of Uncle Sam. So can I transform that icon and get people to think about questions in a different way? Modestly, I think that's a lot if I could do that. Will I get them, into a debate about syndicalism versus, uh, pacifist anarchism versus, religious anarchism, the role of Jesus in there's all kinds of wonderful anarchists that if I can just take something like, as a theater person, people do it in different ways. Can I take something like Uncle Sam and get them to think differently about it, and to see that where he's appearing? I'm noticing people saying, "Oh, I saw you at the demo some time ago for public housing. You're with the Yes in My Backyard people who are fighting out here in this very wealthy community for housing for low-income people. Uncle Sam was there, and he had a sign that said, 'I support low-income housing.'" Oh, that's interesting. And now you're over here. So my answer is that we take the powerful political systems like voting, uh, the media, theater, the church, the synagogue, the powerful institutions, and see how we can use them, transform them, if possible. Sometimes it's not possible, and you have to be clear about that, as opposed to, developing a cell of 5 people who meet every couple of weeks and talk about Bakunin, or I don't know, whatever, Murray Bookchin. So yeah, I think that's what we try to do. Those of us who carry those insights, and that you try to figure out how to do that within the institutions that are here. The thing that I had the most deepest discussions and disagreements with Murray Bookchin and others in the social ecology movement is when we try to figure out how hierarchical society, why hierarchy emerges in the human race. And it's pretty easy to point to patriarchy, and we can go back, as many have done, and say, well, why does patriarchy emerge? And to try to look at the different places and ways, because there are variations that we can see historically, obviously because of natural environment, et cetera, that patriarchy emerges. I don't think you can have a fruitful discussion about the questions of anarchy without addressing patriarchy. And where I feel, as a movement or as a concept of ideas, we failed is in understanding, or trying to understand, why patriarchy emerges. And Murray talked about the relationship to nature and the domination of nature, and how that human beings were able to and did begin to dominate nature, which out of that emerges patriarchy. I feel like there's a step further back, and it's something that some people have written and talked about, but I don't think enough. I think it's a struggle of death. I think that even among the most uh, uh, sophisticated political thinkers, I find when you get back to talk about the role of mortality, the role of death, and how we as a species have succeeded or not, mostly not, dealt with death, that's when you begin to understand how you can how the father or the mother begin to dominate a family and begin to that religion begins to emerge and patriarchy begins to emerge, and that is that we have not very successfully dealt in the human race with death, with our mortality. And I feel like it's an area that has not been very well understood, and I'm as I'm in my 80s. This may have something to do with it. That's not true. I've been thinking about this. So anyway, that I would say that for those of us who think in these terms, I would argue that it's important to look at those writers who have gone deeper. The Denial of Death is an important book. Don't ask me to name the author because I can't remember anyone's name. But anyway, The Denial of Death is an excellent book about this. But so I would say that my thinking about the questions that emerge around anarchism, the one thing that's not been explored enough is the question of mortality in the human species, and how we've dealt with it or not dealt with it.